All right, so let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good afternoon, Jason. My name is Claudio. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C. From the studios in Fairfax City. Very humble and grateful that Jason Blake accepted our invitation to the show. Jason, welcome to the show, man.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Hey, no problem. Let's go back to the beginning, Jason. Were you born like in a musical family? How old were you when you perhaps began taking piano lessons, guitar lessons when you were a little kid?
I wouldn't say my family was necessarily a musical family, but I remember as a very young kid, my dad always playing records for us on the weekend. So some of the earliest music I remember hearing was Tommy by The Who.
Yeah.
And a lot of, he was really into Mike Post. He did a lot of TV shows and composing for TV shows, and he had a few records of Mike Post. I remember a lot of that. So it was, for example, he did the soundtrack or the song for Rockford Files. He did NYPD Blue later on, but this was early on, and he would play that music a lot. So I remember that. But I wouldn't necessarily say that they were very musical, but they did get me into playing music early. So I started taking piano lessons pretty early. I would say, I don't remember exactly how old I was, but second grade, so maybe somewhere in there. So I started playing piano for first, and I played piano for many years, actually. And then in high school, I switched to playing guitar, a little bit of guitar, and eventually bass. And that's when I started playing with bands. I kind of towards the end of high school, and really in college, I was in bands the entire time in college. I also started a college degree in music. Somebody persuaded me to bail on that and get a degree in something that they thought was more useful for me in life. So I bailed on the music degree, but I actually started going down that degree or down that path. I was playing upright bass at the time and learning from two different instructors. One was a jazz instructor and one was a classical instructor. So I was kind of taking that approach. I was playing electric bass in a lot of bands at the time, and did that actually for many years. I would, to a certain degree, I still consider myself a bass player. But then found the touchstyle guitar, which started with a Chapman stick and eventually moved to the Warr Guitar. And that's when I really kind of found my instrument, the one that spoke most to me. And it's kind of nice because in retrospect, it incorporates the piano with the whole way both hands are moving and touching the strings, but then it has that bass end of it because it has some low end in my left hand, and then I play more of the melody with the right hand. So it kind of incorporated everything. That's how I eventually moved to that instrument.
Gotcha. So when you were sort of high school, 18 years old, was any pressure for your parent to, hey, forget about the music, you're not going to make any money, you want to get married on the road, go to college, don't do anything music, study business engineering, whatever, or you were free to kind of choose to your path?
No, they were very encouraging. In fact, I was just thinking about this the other day. One of my first bands rehearsed in our basement, and I think about how terrible that was. They would try to watch TV and they'd have to turn the volume all the way up because we were making so much noise in the basement. And we rehearsed 4 nights a week. So I don't know how in the world they allowed that and put up with it. But it lasted about a year. And then I think they finally had enough. And they said, all right, can you guys look for somewhere else? But I mean, they encouraged it to the point that we were allowed for an entire year to make a complete racket in the basement. So.
Sure. What kind of music were you listening at the time when you were 18, 15, 16?
I was always into heavier music, so I would say at that time I was definitely more into heavy metal and that kind of thing. We wanted to be progressive. I don't think we got quite there yet. I don't know if we were good enough at the time, but we tried our best to make interesting music. But it was always heavy. Always heavier music that I was into at the time, which is kind of weird because at the same time I was studying jazz and classical. So I had I had that interest as well. I listened to a lot of that as well. But when it came to playing, I was always in more rock bands.
Yeah. Okay. Do you make any money? Playing live during the weekend, some gigs, clubs, or coffee shop, or whatever at the time, or
I wouldn't say good money, but I would say that
enough
on
to?
the college scene, we were actually pretty decent, and
Wow.
we used to bring out quite a few people. One of the bands that I think had the most potential was also the shortest lived. We just four members that came together and wrote some really good music together, but socially together, we just didn't really fit very well. So we were constantly arguing, and so it didn't really work in the end. But I think we did a lot of great stuff, and that would be, I would say, the one that actually did the most during those college years as well.
Enough money to buy pizza and beer, I suppose.
Yeah, there you go. That was
That's
about
the
it.
diet that you
That's all I wanted at the time, though, so it didn't really matter.
you don't have a girlfriend or something, or you want to enjoy your music, and I studied on the day, or tried to study on the day. So I know how it's like, man. And like I told you before, I went to school there in Chicago as well. So I have great memories. Great memory from Chicago. It's always going to be Chicago and Boston. Is always going to be on the top of my list. Both cold cities, but and then for jobs and opportunity, we end up moving with the family to DC about I don't know 13 years ago. But have great memory from there. Feel free to elaborate on the on the Warr guitar, the 12-string guitar, incorporating guitar and bass. How difficult it is to learn. Why that particular instrument to begin with? So
yeah, so like I was mentioning, I think it came into it somewhat from a nice progression and a natural progression. I was, had the piano background. I was playing stringed instruments at the time. So, I mean, it nicely incorporates both of them. So that it made sense. But I think the biggest thing that happened was that on bass, I was doing a lot of tapping already. So because I liked that sound and I liked that playability and what flexibility, what I was able to do by tapping the strings and using both hands to create more complex melodies, it seemed like a natural progression. So when somebody turned me on to the instrument, I kind of knew exactly, this is what I was supposed to be doing, was playing on this instrument. I started with a 8-string stick bass, which is tuned similar to a bass, just has the extended range. And then moved to a grand stick, which is the 12-string version of the Chapman stick. And then from there moved to the Warr Guitar. And so I've been playing Warr Guitar ever since. It seemed like a natural progression to me.
Yeah.
Oh, and coming back to the question about playing, it's taken time. I would say that like any instrument, really, like, the amount of time you put into it. I came into it at a good time in my life too, where I just poured myself into it and just played it constantly, and I still do, actually. But I think that's the only way to really truly get good on an instrument, but especially this one, where it is a little bit harder to wrap your head around how to play it. It's just hours.
I'm sure you're familiar with the band Stickman, right? With Tony Levin and Mastelot and all those guys, right? So
yeah.
I remember when I was listening to your music, I remember about listening to the music. I got to be interviewing Tony in between the gigs he's doing with Peter Gabriel and these very good people, very good music. And so you're done with high school, right? And then what's happened with college, between the time in college and then when you release your first album? I think it's called The Absence of Colors, right? So in 20 years.
There wasn't too much of a time gap in between end of college and releasing that. I moved around a lot, though, so I think that's one of the things that also kind of stopped me. I would, every once in a while, when I would get a band that seemed like it was up and running, I seemed to always be moving. And I would say at that time, I was living in the Detroit area, and I moved back to Chicago. And so Chicago, I was only here about a year or two when I put together that Absence of Color album. So that was the first album I had done on a touchstyle instrument. That was the stick bass actually on that one. I was playing in a few different things at the time, a few different bands, some rock bands with vocals, and I was doing, I had a string trio at the time, and it kind of all morphed and started falling apart at the same time. And that album was kind of the result of everything that was happening at the time. So it's a bit of a mixture of what I was listening to, playing at the time. I was into world music, very heavily influenced at that time too. So there's a definite touch of that in that album. And it was just me and a drummer on that album. But live, I added a cellist. And so again, it was that kind of a mixture of what I was doing with the string trio and writing with a different, more rock mentality. And it kind of morphed into being this band with a cellist, myself, and the drummer. I really wish that formation would have recorded something, because I think that sounded really great when we were playing live, and we played a lot as that in that formation. We just never got around to recording anything, unfortunately.
Where were you playing in the Chicago area?
That would have been in the Chicago area.
Right, during you have another job at the time. You're doing weekend things or evening things, or
at the time, where was that? I would have been I was in the advertising agency business at that time. Yeah. So
I got you. And then how difficult was to get deal with a record label? You did it on your own, or you went to self-release, or you went to a record label? Because
the first couple albums I did, I actually formed my own record label at the time. And I went to some conferences out in Las Vegas with a music industry guy, and it was really encouraging. I came back from them always very pumped to go do it all myself. He was always really big on that mentality of how to do it yourself. So I came back, formed a record label, and released that first album, and then 2 Aziola Cry records were on that record label. And then the intent was to start, taking it a little further, but then it started getting interest from other people, and then it just kind of folded, and I put it off to the side, because since then there's been interest from other labels, and so I've gone that route.
So at the time, you say interest for other people to go into a record label, or other record label approaching you, approaching you and say, "Hey, we can do better mastering, engineering. We have the resources, to do it better, like you or whatever."
Yeah, and, that's exactly so.
Yeah,
just everything seemed to be like for me just an upwards ramp. Everything just got a little bit bigger every single time, and so the next logical progression was for a label to take hold of what I was doing. I felt like I was getting close to the point of I had done everything I possibly could for the music, and I needed something else, and that was around the time too that labels started gaining interest in the band. So it was kind of right time, right place.
Yeah. Were you able to sell record or CDs at the time enough to make a little bit of money via music? Or
so it's a little bit of an interesting thing, because there is a big time gap that I'll kind of address. When those latter Aziola, the first 2 Aziola Cry albums came out, those actually sold very well for me, and that was all financed by me. That was my record label. That was all, and that did really well. We got a lot of great reviews on it. We were playing out quite a bit, and so I would say that it was starting to really grow. Things were moving in the right direction. Something happened. I'll just give you the 2-second version of it. I got divorced at the time, and that created a very, everything got slowed down basically. So there was a long gap, and when we had actually started recording the 3rd album, and then there had to be this long pause on everything. When we came back to finishing the album, having it all completely done, mastered, and ready, that's when labels picked it up. And at that point, it's kind of taken a life of its own now with that band and my solo stuff. So that was The Ironic Divide, which came out 2021, so a couple of years ago now. So yeah.
The other album that I really like is, I think it could have been the second one, the Aziola Cry, Ellipsis, right?
Yeah, that's the first album by.
Oh, okay. So which one came first, Aziola or The Absence of Color?
The Absence of Color came first. That somewhat morphed its way. I started writing music
I see.
What would be the next album, kind of that post that, and it turned into that band called Aziola Cry. Because I also started working in more of a progressive rock sort of vocabulary. So with that, and I wanted to change that up from what the stuff in my name at the time was a little bit more world music and jam sort of based. And so it became a band.
Yeah. I don't need to tell you, but most, people that play guitar or piano, or any instrument for that matter, they have their own band. They want to explore different avenues of music, so they don't play with a trio and then they come back 2 years later. Hey, have some idea, let's put something together. At the same time, the other guy would play with you in a trio. They do other stuff with other people, so like a sort of network, kind of social network type of a scenario where a lot of people play for everybody. And in many ways, it's good, I think, right? Because you can, you definitely want to explore your stuff, right? So.
Absolutely. I found that so the real trajectory of how I plotted this out. So if you listen to Ghost Conversations, it's a 3-part full album. The first part is almost all ambient music.
Yep.
And so I used to incorporate my love for ambient music into that band. Then what happened is we recorded The Ironic Divide, and that was really intentionally meant to be just, we're going to strip away all the atmospherics and everything and put out just a heavy record with just drums, guitar, and Warr Guitar. And in doing that, it kind of opened up this idea that I had was, well, where would I put my ambient music? Because I really still enjoy listening to that and writing it. So that's what kind of created this offshoot of me starting to do things on my own. So the first thing I did in that realm was called The Darkness Found in Shadows. And that was a straight up ambient album. I had this idea of taking the 7 deadly sins and putting music to each of the 7 deadly sins. And that's what that album was. Yeah. And then from there, I did another one called Fictional Mirrors. That was a part of a trilogy that I'm working on. I've released 2 parts of that. And that was me kind of mixing some ambient music with the progressive rock thing. So there's odd time signatures and there's more of a structure to the songs, but it still feels very ambient in nature. And then there's the part 2 of that came out last year called The Compromise Rationale. And that whole idea was taking the super ego, the ego, and the id and exploring each of those ideas. So up to this point, I've done the super ego and the ego, and the id would be the last of those albums to do at some point. And then I released a couple other ambient albums in that same time frame, The Perfect Fallacy and Dreaming in Numbers. But then what happened, and this is so I got all that I found my avenue for releasing my ambient music. So I no longer really incorporate that into Aziola Cry, the band. But then what was kind of happening is I needed to go back and write something for Aziola Cry, and I wasn't sure where to go. And I wrote what I thought would maybe be the next album, and that's what became Subsequent Ruins, the last thing I just did with Marco Miniman. Yep. And it just, to me, didn't sound like that band. So I decided I would record it myself. And it also, what it allowed me to do is that I guess maybe I had music in me that needed to come out in order for me to get to a place where I could write the next Aziola Cry record. So in putting this album out, it allowed me I don't know how to even describe it, just open my headspace up to being able to write the next Aziola Cry record, which I did over the holiday break of like last year into early this year. And so we started recording that. The drums have been tracked, the Warr guitars have been tracked, and now the guitars are going to be tracked in the next month. So, yeah, it all, to me, it all makes sense. This path I'm going down. It's just sometimes it feels a little, like I'm doing a lot of different things and a lot of different sounds. But to me, it's all kind of a part of what makes sense to me, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta explore what makes you happy, right? And when you are, I don't know, early 20s, you like this kind of music, and you follow the following bands, and then late 20s, you like that, and so forth, and it's sometimes bands want to no, we are only a progressive band now. You don't want to play ambient music or world music, or because we'll lose the crowd that follows us or buy our music. And on the other hand, you need to do what make you happy, I suppose, right? Eventually, you need to follow a path, but some people can do a lot of different things, and very talented. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too that always interests me, I'm a big fan of Jonas Hellborg, the bass player, Swedish bass player. And what I always loved about he created his own record label, and that was one of the inspirations for when I signed. But what I really liked is every album that he did was drastically different from the last one. And I liked that you never knew what you were going to get. One album, he would be working with a frame drummer, and the next album would be a rock guitarist and a drummer, and then the next one after that would be a sitar player. And it was just, everything was always, you never knew what would be next. So I guess I come from a little bit of that too, where I like the idea of not necessarily making the same album over again, and instead trying something different. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of created this vast sound, I guess I'm trying to create, but all using the same instrument. And that's the one thing I do stick with. Everything on every one of my records is purely the Warr Guitar. There is no added, unless there's, a guitarist and a drummer like in the band, but everything that it's all being created by me on that Warr Guitar.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I believe that Jonas now is playing with Steve Hackett in his band. Yeah, I interviewed Jonas. He's a very nice guy. I interviewed him, I don't know, like 4 months ago. And then I like Genesis, so I like Steve Hackett and Bias, I suppose. But good to be seeing him several times here, in a couple of months when he come back to the United States tour. And you're very prolific. Some people will say, man, I would be happy if I could do one record or one CD or whatever the output the media happens to be, but in your case you have done over 10. So it's how you manage to make time, how you're able to work and sleep and play and record and tour and make a little bit of money on the side, playing gigs for the weekend.
Some days it's easier than others. I'll admit that. Right now, I feel very inspired. I don't know what creating all this music. I mean, I've got three more things that might be coming out this year, and already next year I've got another 2 that I just started finishing up or in the process of finishing up. So I don't know. It's just, what I'm doing is I'm riding this wave because I know that at some point it might dry up. And so I don't want to necessarily stop until that time comes. So right now it just seems like I'm just very motivated and creative, and the creation is just coming to me. So I might as well just stick with it. So
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, if that's your passion and that's what you like to do, who am I to criticize you? So go for it. And in March, a couple of months ago, you ended up releasing Subsequent Ruins with Marco on drums. It's a very good album. I listened to that last night, and as I was preparing questions for the interview, and I really like it. Very different from the other stuff you have done in the past. I haven't listened to everything you have done, but enough to give an idea of your music and that kind of stuff. It's a lot more, progressive, and it's very well done, put together. How long does it take for you to end?